All right. Good afternoon, everyone. Thank you all again for joining us today. My name is Muhammad Muhammad. I'm the executive director here at the Jerusalem Fund and Palestine Center. And as always, it's a pleasure to welcome you all here. We really appreciate you watching, tuning in, and we appreciate all of your support. Before we get started, I would just like to ask you, please continue to support us by watching our events. Tell your friends and family about us. And if you can, please donate to the Jerusalem Fund and Palestine Center so that we can continue to put on events like this. We would really greatly appreciate any support that you can give. Please also follow us on social media, on our Facebook page, on our Instagram, and on our Twitter. And spread the word, please. That would be great. Today, we are happy to host Huda Ammori, who will be speaking. She is the co-founder of Palestine Action in the UK. And she will be talking about everything that Palestine Action has been doing in support of the Palestinian struggle. So Palestine Action is a direct action network demanding an end to UK complicity with Israeli apartheid. Huda Ammori will discuss the necessity and achievements of Palestine Action's approach to solidarity with the Palestinian people, and how it is taking direct action to shut down Elbit, which is an Israeli weapons manufacturer that has a facility in the UK. So Huda is an activist. She is of Palestinian and Iraqi descent. She has coordinated national BDS campaigns and completed extensive research on British complicity with Israeli apartheid. She is a co-founder of Palestine Action, again, which is a direct action network targeting Elbit Systems, which is Israel's largest private arms company. At the end, after she speaks, we will have a Q&A session. So you can send us your questions in the YouTube side chat, as well as through Twitter. So please send us your questions for her. And our Twitter handle is @Palestine Center. So again, I would like to thank you, Huda. Thank you so much for being with us today. We are very excited to hear what you have to say, especially since you are all in the UK. Usually our speakers are in the US, so it'll be a good perspective to get over there. So thank you so much for joining us. And yeah, please go ahead.
Thank you. And so I start by saying thank you so much for having me and for that introduction. So we'll be talking about Palestine Action. I want to start off and begin with myself and my own family history and what brought me to taking direct action for Palestine in Britain. So as you mentioned, I am Palestinian on my father's side and I am Iraqi on my mother's side. I was fortunate enough to grow up here. And just to give a bit of context to my family history, which every single Palestinian, as I'm sure many people here watching this will know, and the Palestinians I'm speaking with, has a history which relates back to the occupation and Israel's apartheid regime. But I will just start with my own. So coming from a British context, it was 1917 when the UK issued the Balfour Declaration, which was essentially calling for the ethnic cleansing of the Palestinian people, the indigenous people of Palestine, in order to make way for Israel to have a Jewish state, which meant getting rid of the Palestinian people. Which they never had the right to do that. And it was shortly after that declaration in the 1920s when my great-grandfather was shot and killed by a British soldier at the time in Palestine. And my great-grandma was pregnant at the time that is why I exist today. And she, later gave birth to my granddad and grew up as a single mother in historic Palestine. Many years later, as many people will know, and I won't go too much onto the history because I expect this is an audience which kind of knows the history, but in 1948, Israel, the Zionist militia came in with advanced military equipment backed by Western governments, and came and wiped out and forced out more than half of the Palestinian population from their homes at that time, destroyed over 500 towns and villages, and massacred many families at the same time. It was later in 1967 when my own father was with his younger brothers and sisters when the Israeli military came in, shooting into the front room of their house, where they had to hide under the table in their front room and crawl to the back of their house and run with no shoes on, just what they had on them at the time, to hide in caves, and then later left and ended up in Iraq, was where my father met my mother. And this is a story which continues to get worse for Palestinians. Not only do many of us live with the history of it, but Palestinians have to endure this every single day of their lives whilst Israel's apartheid regime continues. I grew up here. I was very fortunate enough to do so, and I recognize that, and I'm sure many people here may be in a similar situation when you acknowledge that privilege you have to grow up in a Western country, and also the complications that come with it when you understand just how complicit the countries that we live in are with the oppression of our people, of the Palestinian people, the Iraqi people, and people across the world. It was in 2015 when I decided to go out with a week's notice to Greece during the refugee crisis. It was the peak of the refugee crisis. And I went out as an independent volunteer, and I thought I knew stuff. I thought I knew about the history of the Middle East, and I'd visit my family, etc. And when I saw that, and I would see families, running for their lives, people dying on the shores of Europe, a 5-month-old baby dying on New Year's Eve because they were of hypothermia whilst they were in Europe. And I saw the UN, for 2,000, I believe at the time, refugees who were forced to sleep outside, give out 70 blankets for 2,000 people. The things that I saw and the history of those people and what led them to risk everything to come here really stuck with me. And the thing that stuck with me the most was that I saw myself, I saw my own family in every single one of those people, and realized just how lucky I was. And I went back to England, and I was on a mission, so to speak. And I said, well, if I live in a democratic country, and this country is so involved in the complicity and the arms trade and profiting from these wars that lead people to leave their homes in the first place, then I should be able to make a difference. And I did many different things around the arms trade. I researched into university complicity. I started divestment campaigns. I protested and produced posters, etc. I lobbied. I've gone on to work at Palestine Solidarity Campaign, where I lobbied several politicians, talked about arms embargo. And one thing that I was always passionate about was the arms embargo between UK and Israel, because I understood that in order to actually change the situation, you have to sanction the oppressor in order to actually make a change in order to force them to actually change their behaviour. And I'd then, I know this is coming from a British context, but at the time when we had Jeremy Corbyn come in, everyone thought this was the big hope. And myself and many other people had lobbied and campaigned for an arms embargo to be on the manifesto of the Labour Party, of which it was. And many people invested their hopes, their time, their energy into making Labour Party under Jeremy Corbyn a success, so that we could achieve those aims which actually had material impact for people across the world. Now, unfortunately, that didn't go so well. He was completely destroyed in the media, and a lot of that had to do with his support for the Palestinian people. And I think at that moment, it really drilled in just how much we cannot trust the usual politics as normal as a vehicle for change especially when we're living in such complicit countries. I remember in 2003, when over 1 million people went out to demonstrate against the US-UK invasion of Iraq, which I'm sure is personal to many people in America as well. And they went on and killed over 1 million Iraqis. And all of my family lived in Baghdad and went through that and saw what happened to them. And it gets to a point when you start to realize that the governments for over 100 years have continued to enable Israel's apartheid regime. And not only do they enable it, they profit from it. They profit from these wars in Iraq. They profit from the arms trade of the drones in Afghanistan. They are profiting from the murder of people across the world. And it's happening here. And to appeal to those same politicians time and time again is proven pointless in my eyes. It's not a situation of education or informing politicians anymore. They know, they saw what happened just in May. There was no way that anyone can say that they are ignorant. They know the situation, but rather than do anything about it, they continue to support it. And that's exactly when direct action comes in. Direct action is about not appealing to the middleman, not appealing to a politician or anyone else to make the change that has to happen, and treating the situation with the urgency that it deserves, which means we go straight to the source. And for us in Britain, and same again in America, we have Elbit Systems, Israel's largest private arms company, who have 10 sites across Britain. And they are literally manufacturing weapons which they label as battle tested, tested on the captive population of Gaza mostly. And this is why the Israel's arms trade does so well. You'll see it in a lot of their videos. They go on about how these weapons are tested, how they're innovators of the drone project, because they are using violations of international law in order to build these weapons which are then tested on Palestinians, built here, built in America as well. They're all over America. So are many arms companies, as I'm sure people will know. And then build them here, and then they're used to kill people across the world. And they use this marketing tool that they have a captive population that they can test their weapons on as an ability to sell to other oppressive regimes across the world. And this includes the Indian occupation of Kashmir. This includes the discrimination of Rohingya Muslims in Myanmar. And to be honest, the list just goes on. And here in England as well, they've also made a contract to use these very drones, which are flying above the heads of people in Gaza constantly in order to surveil the channel to stop migrants from seeking refuge here in England. So not only is it in Gaza where people are denied basic rights, they're denied the freedom of movement, they're a captive population in the most densely populated areas on earth, who are stripped of those rights that every single human being is entitled to and deserves. And then they have to constantly face bombardments by Israel. It all connects back to here and where we are. And that's why we essentially started Palestine Action, which is a direct action network, as you mentioned, to seek to end British complicity with Israeli apartheid. Our primary target and only target really is Elbit Systems. And part of the reasoning behind this is because we want to win. And in order to win, we have to put our resources around one company, and Elbit, we can safely say, is the worst of the worst when it comes to complicit companies, and they are all around us. So we began by, it was just, I think it was 4 of us at the time, and we went and stormed into the headquarters in the London office of Elbit Systems, and we went in and spray painted across their office. We did whatever we could. We were outnumbered by security, and we came the next week. We came back the next week, and we did it again, and we went with more people, and we reached their offices on the 7th floor and did the same thing. And then more and more people joined us. And actually, I think we're refreshed by this approach of going, we're going to go straight to the source. We're going to stop Elbit Systems. We have tried through every other channel, but this government and these politicians are adamant on protecting Israel rather than actually acting in the interests of people here and people across the world. That means we have to go straight to the source and stop them. And ever since then, we've had, I think, over 100 activists take direct action in the form of climbing onto the roof, as many people would have seen, occupying these factories for as long as possible, damaging their buildings, damaging their machinery in order to stop them from being able to actually produce these weapons and build these components and to disrupt their business. We've had people lock onto the gates in order to stop them from being able to enter and go into the workplace. And in our first year alone, we cost Elbit Systems over £15 million and shut them down for over 105 days. So that's 3 months out of the year. And for us, that's our plan, is to continue. It's a sustained campaign, and to sustain it, we need more and more people to join us, but also to take on this approach across the world, because the way direct action works is there's 3 different concepts to it. The first is being disruptive. You have to be disruptive to your target, to that company. If that's material disruption, using our own bodies to disrupt that company from being able to function. And as we know how capitalism and these companies and the arms trade works, is that it's all about profits. You know, it's profits over humanity time and time again. We literally have an industry which is legalized, which profits from death. That's their sole source of income, is the murder of innocent people. So taking away that profits from them, disrupting their production line. And often when there is high level amounts of damage, it means that those factories are shut for a lot longer than the occupation. We've seen them be shut for 3 weeks at a time after an action has taken place because of the level of disruption. The second, which isn't a popular word, but it's one to understand in the context of coming from Western countries, privileged countries, countries which are privileged because it's built off the backs of oppressed people across the world, is sacrifice. There has to be an element of sacrifice. So when people put themselves on the line in order to stop these weapons from being produced and are willing to risk their liberty because this issue is so important and people's lives are literally at stake, then that matters. That makes other people stop and say, well, why are these people getting arrested for this? What's going on here? There must be an important reason. And it no longer becomes a complicated issue. It becomes about whether the approach is right or not, etc. And the focus comes onto that company. Why are they targeting that company, Elbit Systems? And the third, which is a crucial one, is causing a dilemma for that company. So for example, for Elbit Systems, the dilemma becomes, when does it reach a point when the political embarrassment and loss of having to move their production from a country which they deem one of their strongest ally out, when does that loss outweigh the financial loss, which is what all of these companies, or when does that financial loss and that disruption and that exposure and the damage to their reputation outweigh the political embarrassment of them having to move? And it's that point, when we create that dilemma for the company, that we will see change happen. And we've seen it happen in Britain. We've seen several people join the movement, several people, we've had people go inside and destroy all of Elbit's machinery inside those factories. And it's not stopping by any means. If anything, we are just growing. And we've seen the media respond in different ways than we've seen normally when it comes to Palestine. We've actually had the BBC, British Broadcasting Channel, cover a lot of our actions and actually call it a weapons manufacturer, an Israeli company. And for us, that was a massive win, because they kept saying, security company, etc. We've had it covered nationally, internationally, and it creates a storm wherever Palestine Action goes. There is always a reaction from the local community, and that idea of always taking action and letting the response happen and building off that, rather than doing the usual awareness building, etc. For example, when 4 people from Palestine Action during the bombing of Gaza went onto the roof of one of Elbit's factories in a city called Leicester, we saw immediately the community come out in droves outside that factory, supporting the activists on the roof, calling for the closure of that factory. And they were rightly so angry at the fact that there was even an Israeli arms company operating in that area, because often these companies can just hide as a normal office building or a normal factory and nobody gets to see what's actually happening. But by activists going on top of the roof, throwing red paint to symbolize the bloodshed by these companies, and occupying that building, led so many people to come out. There was thousands of people over the course of 6 days. They occupied that factory. And in the end, when the police actually wanted to arrest the activists and take them off the roof, there was, I think in a matter of half an hour, there was probably about 30 people outside, then there was 100, then there was 500. And the local community, this is families, women, children, men, coming out and chaining the gates, putting up their own blockade to stop the police from arresting those activists and putting themselves at risk of getting arrested, because the issue is so important and people are united behind the fact that we should not have companies like Elbit Systems operating on our doorsteps. And how do we stop that? Is by taking direct action, because direct action is treating it with the urgency that the situation deserves. And many of us in Palestine Action were inspired by movements like Extinction Rebellion, which had grown in 2019 here in Britain and across the world, inspired by the fact that people were risking their liberty because the climate crisis was such an urgent issue. But human beings deserve that same urgency. It's an urgent issue every single day. People's lives are at stake. People are having to live under Israel's apartheid regime. People in Iraq are living, in a country that's been destroyed. We're seeing it in Afghanistan now. I mean, it's been happening for 20 years. It's Israel's drones, it's Elbit's drones, and it all roots back to us. And that's why we take direct action to use our privilege to stop these weapons from being made here, and eventually then to go on to win it in the courts, which is a whole, I'm not sure how long I've spoken for, which is a whole other arena when it comes to Israel's arms companies avoiding prosecuting activists in order to not have to face up to their crimes in court. But I think I'll end there and allow for questions. And
yeah, thank you. Thank you so much, Huda. So I guess what I want to ask is, I guess this is something that I always just came to my mind. Why is Elbit even in the UK? Why is an Israeli company manufacturing in the UK? I mean, is it like a tax benefit? Is it a financial benefit? Why are they even there to begin with?
Well, I think it's a really good question, and I think there are a lot of ways to answer it, and a lot of answers to that question. They're densely populated in the UK. They are dotted around Europe, in America, Australia, etc. I think a lot of it has to do with political diplomacy, right? If you are allies of a country, you're bringing business to that country, and creating that, and the fact that the UK support and allyship for Israel creates an environment where Israel is welcome to bring their business to the UK and to build there and to use what they call the expertise of the British people, etc., in order to manufacture these weapons. But a lot of it has to do with the fact that the UK is a strong ally for Israel. We don't see, this is the thing with these arms companies, you see, they're never built in front of the people that they will kill or the people that they oppress. They are built in countries which are favourable to that oppression and to the oppressor. So I think that's a strong reason why they've been allowed to operate here in Britain for so long.
I guess my guess would be, so, obviously everyone knows that the US provides billions of dollars in aid to Israel per year. From what I understand, I think that some of it's required to be used basically to support, workers here in the U.S. Is that what you think? Like maybe because, okay, the UK gives, let's say $1 billion to Israel per year, so they have to manufacture weapons do you think that's part of it, or?
I would say that's part of it. That's part of being an ally to a country is that, these multinational companies can come and so-called bring jobs to the area. Even though what we're actually seeing in Britain is, and this is across the arms trade, is that the arms industry is actually one of the, I think, the worst in terms of capital to employment ratio, because people are just being overtaken a lot of the time by machines. They're not even great employers. But we've in the UK, it's a massive issue. We're, I think, the second largest exporter of arms across the world, and we are a very small island, as you can imagine. So literally every city, every town, there is a connection to the arms trade. So it's a pivotal industry for the UK, and which makes sense being in the imperial core, which is that they are going to benefit as well, not only from the imperialism of other countries, but also through the arms trades. They're also benefiting there from these industries being here. But I would say, and one of our aims is to make that so unbeneficial for both Britain by embarrassing them, that their own people are willing to, British people are willing to get arrested and sacrifice their liberty to get rid of a foreign arms company from this country, and also for Elbit Systems, who cannot sustain, they cannot have a continual operation like any business wants, or safety in this country, because Palestine Action, because we are determined and we will continue to occupy and destroy their buildings whilst they operate here. So we hope that, all of that will outweigh any benefit or reasoning that the UK has to make these disgusting links with the arms trade.
Sure. And so I guess a good question is, the UK and the US are different, but and to a certain extent, I would expect that, some people in the UK, like here, it's not that they don't care. It's just that they're not really aware of what's going on. What would you say, how's the reaction been from local British people over there? I mean, do you feel like you've been able to reach to people? I mean, how do you see that?
I definitely think, and this is one of the things about taking action, is that it's shocking to people to see people on top of a building causing damage, or what we would call dismantling their war machine. And the word normally spreads like wildfire when one of these actions are happening in a city or in a local town amongst the local community. And Elbit is placed in all different types of places across England, a lot of which are mostly Asian communities, Muslim communities who are living in that area. And we have seen it, in Leicester, a massive amount of people came out from all different types of backgrounds, and a lot of support in those communities. But more interestingly, I think, is actually where we've gone, where there's been a Tory stronghold. Tory is like the right wing for Britain. And so, for example, there's Shenstone, which is like this sleepy village, not much happens. You've got a local shop, you've got a local pharmacy, and people talk, and they're mostly right wing. And this is when I did an action there in September. And when we got on the roof, we didn't get much support from the local community. We would get told, "Oh, get a job," or racist comments, etc. And we repeatedly kept talking about why we were up there. We normally get a very positive media response, actually. And before I was on one of the days, I was speaking in the loudspeaker, and I talked about how Gaza is majority of the population of children, and how these drones are traumatizing them every single day, and how they've been used to kill many Palestinian children. And she went and walked by, but later a local journalist who was very supportive, went around and started asking the local community what they thought, because we'd had several other actions after that point. And one of the he actually spoke to that woman, coincidentally, small village, and she said there was a woman speaking on the loudspeaker, and she started talking about how they're killing children, and I was pushing my baby on a pram, and how can I not relate to that? I think I wouldn't do it, but I think they're doing the right thing. It's wrong. And then you have others going, well, actually, I don't even like the building. It's an eyesore, etc. So throughout constantly going and taking action, seeing people getting arrested, etc., then we actually saw a lot of people in that community do support us, and people did come out and provide water for people who took action afterwards, and foods, etc. And it changes the shift in that community. And I think often, we look at people as one, and like to divide people into boxes, but actually when you speak to people on a human level, whatever we deem their political views to be, and explain these issues on a single issue, or talk about the arms trade, the vast majority of people are going to be supportive, because to them, when they actually hear about the arms trade, and Israel's arms trade in particular, it's inexcusable. There is no justification, and no moral human being would support that. So I think even in areas where we'd expect resistance, we have had support, and it galvanizes the local community as well, and it galvanizes other groups. We've seen it in Oldham. They're going out every week, every Tuesday. They've been there today, which is same places in England. No one's going to know, which is in the north of England. And the local community now are going out and regularly protesting after seeing the actions that we've taken, because it moves the Overton window, right? When people take action, that they get arrested, they're smashing windows or destroying weaponry, and doing it accountably as well, right? Because there's no other way you can do it. You're going to get arrested at the end of it. Then it pushes everyone else to go, well, I can do this, and it moves what they would do normally, and it galvanizes and gives them, passion to go out and join the movement, and to focus on that company in that area. So we are seeing that people are normally 99% of the time on side. I'd say actually, it's hard to say, I think we've had the most resistance from our movement from within the Palestine movement, because it's a shock to the system that we're going out there and taking this level of direct action, and sometimes it's hard to kind of adjust to that, or to see something new come in. But we're getting, the support is growing by the day, and every other action we take, that support grows, and in unlikely places as well, in places that you wouldn't expect. So it's not London, that's not the only place taking action. It's cities, it's towns, it's normal people. And I actually kind of relate back, I didn't talk about it much, but to court dates and trials. So because we have a range of actions. There's been people who have locked on or lied in front of the entrance or the gate to stop the work from happening, and to block lorries, etc. They have to shut down the site. And we've seen people go inside the building and destroy their machinery. And those higher level things, shall we say, that do cause that damage tend to be treated in the Crown Court in Britain, which is a higher court, which means that you are trialled by a jury, which is 12 ordinary people picked from that local community. And obviously we have defences and law of necessity, preventing the greater crime. And it's basic. Our defence is basically they're committing war crimes, and we're doing everything to stop them. And at the end of the day, you just can't compare throwing paint to dropping bombs. And that's what gives us a lot of hope when it comes to trials. And we've seen it in the past in Britain. People I think it was 9 men in Derry in Ireland, went inside the Raytheon factory during the 2006 bombings of Israel's bombing of Lebanon. and they went inside the factory, destroyed the whole thing, got arrested. They went to court. They were found not guilty based on what that company was doing. And then 9 women went in, did the same action, got found not guilty, and they were forced to leave. And we've seen it historically. And one thing we're seeing now is that every trial, or we're seeing them drop charges for a lot of people. We're seeing them delay trials. I was supposed to be on trial with 4 other people in May of this year during the bombing of Gaza. And suddenly, once that bombing started, they stopped. They delayed the trial for a year because they knew they would lose because of the situation, and people were talking about it, and there was no way that people were going to side with an Israeli arms company. So I think people is what gives us hope.
Yeah, no, and that makes sense. What I've thought about here is, I mean, this is my opinion, but it's not that Americans or British people or Europeans, it's not that they don't care. I think the bigger problem is that they don't know. So I think what you're doing over there, like you just summed it up, you're spreading awareness. So then when they find out, then they're like, oh, okay, this isn't good. This is not right. So I think it's more of an awareness issue than it is of just, oh, these people don't care about, the deaths of people across the world or whatever it is. So that's what I think. It's more of an awareness issue than it is of actual, oh, I just don't care about these people in the Middle East or wherever it is, regardless of where it is.
Yeah, and I think that's exactly right, and also the fact that they don't feel connected to it, or people become desensitized to the arms trade, or people being murdered for the sake of profit, because it's just information overload for a lot of people. But one thing for us is about bringing it back to British complicity, where it's something that you can't ignore. This is a factory that's operating in your neighbourhood. This is something that is affecting you, that is directly connected to you. And talking about the history of Britain's complicity and what it's doing today, and bringing about that connection with the complicity. Also, I think connects people to the issue and drives them to act on it.
Yeah, certainly. So along similar to that, so we have a question. With the media being heavily censored and reworded about Palestine, how does Palestine Action fight this bias, and how do you spread the true message on social media or wherever? Like, how do you, because I'm sure you get a lot of counter arguments, most of it propaganda, but how do you fight this? They might call you vandals, or they might call you this or that. How do you fight that?
I think through a number of ways. So when we started Palestine Action, one of the things that we wanted to do was not to over intellectualize the Palestine, what's happening in Palestine, and to break it down through a target and to simplify it, right? By saying this is Israel's arms trade who are testing weapons on Palestinians, and talking about Israeli apartheid through Elbit Systems, which connects to people. And it's also, you can't defend it. I mean, obviously there are people who do all the time try to defend Israel's arms trade, but the majority of people, you can't defend it. They can't throw accusations of anti-Semitism because you're targeting an arms company, right? They have, and that has massively backfired on them as well. We had one Zionist group they're targeting local Jewish business. I mean, this is not a local Jewish business. This is an Israeli multinational company who profits from death and destruction. And the reaction to that, I think it was on Twitter, it had like 1,000 or 2,000 quote tweets. People just being like, are you, taking the piss out of this comment? Because it was so ridiculous, because we're talking about the arms trade. So it moves the conversation away from that. But also on that, in terms of I think for us, for getting coverage on our actions was difficult. It varies from action to action. We can never guess how the media is going to react or how they're going to pick up what we do, but we have gotten national coverage quite frequently for these actions. And a lot of it has to do with it being impossible to ignore, right? If people are on an arms factory, throwing paint, destroying their security cameras, air conditioning units, making this company unable to operate, it becomes very difficult for the media to ignore, to the point where, recently we're seeing BBC cover most of our actions, not very well, but, it's in there. And at the same time, we also on the media, we had, I think it was at the start of Palestine Action, a story come out by, it was a campaign for Israel, one of the many campaigns for Israel. And they said that vandalism is not okay. And this was from the campaign manager for We Believe in Israel, I think it was. And she said, looking on and blocking the business of Elbit Systems, that's fine. Sorry, I got a call come through, so it blocked. But anyway, so they were basically saying that protest is fine. This is when We Believe in Israel. Petitions, lobbying politicians, etc. That's fine. Blocking them is fine, but you can't throw paint. That's too much. That's extreme, and that's criminal. That's anti-Semitism. So it was like even the Zionist propaganda was kind of shifting their own what's tolerant, what we're allowed to do, because we pushed things, quite far in terms of our actions. There's no doubt that we're going to have, we haven't really had much media, I think, call us criminals. Actually, most of them refer to us as protesters, which I find quite nice. But I think the main reason for that is because direct action isn't a tool that's not been used before, right? It's been used historically. People recognize the word direct action. They know, they know that there's history in every country of direct action. Here we talk about the suffragettes, etc. There's Extinction Rebellion groups taking action, not in the different types of action, but taking action. I think the main thing for us is plowing on and always making the message very clear, talking about Elbit Systems and targeting Elbit Systems does most of the job for us when it comes towards the media point of view. And it brings into conversation Israel's arms trade and the British links with Israel's arms trade.
Yeah, thank you. I think one question that all of us here in the US want to ask is, what kind of legal issues do you have to deal with? Do you have lawyers that help you? Because quite frankly, I don't know how familiar you are with the US legal system, but I feel like this would not really fly over here. You would face a lot of criminal charges and then possibly jail time. How is it in the UK?
Yeah, so I would say that the US is a shit place to be when it comes to police and law enforcement, etc. But the UK is also quite terrible. We've had, and also it's about realizing what kind of tactics you can use in different countries, right? The principle of direct action occurs, how far you can go might change from place to place in the reaction. We've had a strong reaction from the British state, which is also a signal towards us knowing that we're doing the right thing, because I've done Palestine campaigning before, but when you get such a strong reaction and such a strong attempt to stop you, then you know that you're doing the right thing, right? Because we're facing against something which is so huge. And to conquer global British complicity was really apartheid, and their links with the arms trade is not going to happen easily. You're going to be met with a lot of resistance by the state, etc., before you win. It's always how it's worked historically, and how it will probably happen again and again and again, is that they don't make it easy. We've had myself been arrested very violently before, been stopped under counter-terrorism laws, interrogated for 3-4 hours under terrorism laws, which means that you can't say no comment. You have to comment. It only happened to me and Richard Barnard, another co-founder, and they obviously picked us and decided at the very start the police were very heavy in terms of their intimidation tactics. And I think it's because at the start of a movement is the most likely time, that's when you want to crack down, right? So you can stop them and deter them from continuing anymore. We didn't work, we continued, and many people did as well. And we were detained under terrorism laws. Nothing came of it. In fact, they did use it in other shifty ways, which is a whole story in itself. Richard, another co-founder, has been charged with blackmail. We have been raided several times, and I've had my passport stolen for 2-3 months, which really annoyed me because, as an Arab in a Western country, you want to have the proof of your passport, right? Otherwise, what can they do to you? But I think all of these things we are risking. There is a level of personal sacrifice, and there is a level of risking your liberty in order to carry out this issue. And this is often how history changes, is by facing those challenges head on and realizing that it's only a step on the way to achieving what we want, right? And that it's not going to happen any other way. They're not going to say, you know what, we've got the arguments. We now know that Israel is an apartheid regime and we'll stop, because they already know. And it takes, but the one thing that always happens when there is repression is that there is a backlash, and more people support that movement and more people join, because the more people you have, the harder and harder it is for them to do that. So we saw a massive surge in support. Unfortunately, this happens when Gaza is being bombed and everything is happening in Palestine. And then, we risen exponentially in terms of support for our movement and what we were doing. And ever since then, to be honest with you, it's been quite calm. When we say that, maybe it won't last for long, but there is always challenges with doing these type of things. And I think if it's more extreme in one country than another country, then it's, we've had people go and destroy a whole inside of a factory. It's just toning it to fit what's right for that country or that state, etc. So, if it's blocking their business, we've had many people, and it's a very useful way of stopping them from operating, just chain themselves to the gates or chain themselves to a device, a contraption device, which is hard for them to get you off. So you block and you shut that factory down for the day. There are many different tactics within direct action. There's a diversity of tactics, and about finding the right one for each place. But it's definitely possible, and it's definitely doable. We do have a brilliant team. We have a law firm that we always use in England, and they are brilliant. They're experts now when it comes to Elbit Systems. They're expert in our cases, and they're great. And everyone who comes into the movement uses them. And we have a strategy around legal stuff. And to be honest with you, a lot of us want to get into court. But this is probably unique to Britain again, but we've seen I took action against Elbit in 2017. Many people did. It was sporadic. It was probably once a year. It was nowhere near enough to actually cause a change in that system. But every single case they had dropped. Elbit would not go to trial. When it came to disclosing documents, because that's what you can do if you're in a legal case, is push for that company to disclose documents, they would drop the case because they didn't want to go into court. So, we don't know what can, the full extent of what they can do legally. We have guidelines, etc. We don't know the full extent of how far the police will go to stop us. But I think it's just about acknowledging that that's part of it, and being ready as much as possible, and having a good community around you to take that on and to take action. Because at the end of the day, nothing they can do to us here really compares to what happens to Palestinians, and we can be smart about how we do things. We can be smart about what we do and where we do it, in order to have that level of, not giving the state too much power over you at the same time.
Yeah, and so on a similar note, we actually got an interesting question. Do you think if Palestine Action supported or disrupted more prominent events, like let's say football matches, soccer for the Americans, how do you think that would help in terms of will it force the media to speak more? If you go to a soccer/football match and disrupt that, first of all, is that feasible? Second of all, do you think that would help in terms of advocacy?
I think it's definitely feasible, but I would say though, it's about being strategic and choosing the targets. So there are things which we call movement building, right? So if you do a stunt, something like that, you block a match, then you'll get loads of media coverage. It's building the movement, etc. But you're not directly disrupting the function of those companies that supply the tools for Israel's apartheid regime. And so you're not highlighting that specifically. It's what's the end point, right? It's are we calling for solidarity with Palestine? Are we calling for that country to sanction Israel? What are the demands, and how is that action going to help you achieve those demands? I think should be asked before taking any action. For us, no, I would definitely advocate for people doing disruption as a form or a tool in order to achieving aims. But for us, it's not about appealing, because even if you disrupt a football match and then your demand is for the UK government to then stop harming Israel, for example, just as an example, then you're still appealing to that same politician, right? You bring a lot of attention to it, but it's still appealing. So for us, it's most logical and strategic to focus on Israel's arms trade and to focus on Elbit Systems, one of the biggest culprits of the massacres of the Palestinian people, and to target that and to make that the top of the news, even if it might be more difficult in a lot of senses. But bringing Elbit's business into the news is what destroys their reputation. It's what makes other companies not want to work with them. It's what pushes them further into leaving England and not being able to work in a country which is, as I mentioned before, one of their strongest allies.
So also on a similar note, we had another question, which is, let's say that Palestine Action, we hope so, let's say Palestine Action succeeds in having Elbit move to a different country for operations. Are you focused strictly on the UK, or would you basically want to outsource this kind of work to another country? Like, let's say they go to France or wherever it is. Yeah. So basically, what would be the end game with Palestine? Assuming you successfully shut down Elbit, what would you do next?
Well, one thing for us is, we definitely want people across the world, across Europe, America, Australia, etc., to take on the campaign, but also to take on the idea of doing direct action as Palestine Action in a local context, right? So it's maybe a little bit off the question, but I'll come back to it. For example, if you're in a country which doesn't have Elbit, it's not about necessarily Elbit, it's about finding that target which speaks most to that place. So for example, in Italy, it might be Leonardo or whatever arms company is operating there, and picking your target and making it fit that local context. For us, the biggest embarrassment will be that Elbit's production is so badly disrupted in England that if it's that they have to move or they have to change how they work or operate, etc., it's massive disruption to that company, and it's a massive embarrassment and further isolates Israel. If you cannot operate in Britain, who had a Balfour Declaration over 100 years ago, continues to support Israel's apartheid regime to this day without fault. And then suddenly they can't have an arms company there because the people are so against that they have forced to move. And that will create waves across the world and repercussions for Israel and its arms trade, and make people more closely examine Israel's arms trade in every context. And that's what we hope to achieve. But we are, the people who set up Palestine Action are based in England, so we focus our efforts where we can, but we are speaking to people across the world. We've had people from all over contact who want to do Palestine Action in their area. We've encouraged people to do it, reach out and talk about it. And at the end of the day, we want this to be a global initiative, that this kind of business will not be tolerated and will no longer tolerate the silence and the inaction of our governments as well. And if the governments are going to fail to act, then we will act instead. And that's a principle that can be taken everywhere across the world.
Okay, great. Another question is, how much time does Palestine Action, obviously you guys do everything with shutting down the factories, but how much time do you spend also on raising awareness? Because this commenter said that some workers claim they don't know what's really happening inside. So are you focused just on the direct action, or do you also try to raise awareness for the people who don't know what, Elbit is just a manufacturer, whatever, you work for them. So are you, do you guys do that as well?
So we are solely focused on direct action. And then what I would say about that when it comes to awareness is the direct action brings the awareness. There is no way that not every single employee in Elbit operating in the UK doesn't know about Palestine Action. They've had to vastly increase their security, spent millions of pounds in their security, which has done nothing to stop people. It's quite easy to bypass them, actually. But the fact that they are out of work for so long produces such awareness that we could not replicate through leafleting or stalls, etc. Nothing compares to it when you're on top of a factory and the whole community knows about it, the workers know about it, etc. We do have articles on our website which talk about the arms trade, we talk about Elbit Systems, and we use every action as an opportunity to raise awareness, right? If that's through our press strategy, through our social media, etc., but on the different things that Elbit produces, on how it's, how it started in Palestine, the colonization of Palestine, and how it relates to what we're doing there. So every action we do is an opportunity to bring awareness, which, in my history of campaigning has been the most effective in terms of reaching a big audience in a short amount of time, and to be able to communicate that message. So I would say awareness is embedded in our actions, but it's the actions that bring the awareness. That's what gets the media attention. That's what gets people talking. And then we have that information for people to look at and see the truth and say, all right, you know what, they're doing the right thing. One thing I would say on workers in Elbit Systems is we've had, they don't employ, I think I mentioned this before, they actually aren't massive employers, the arms industry. And even though they make so much here, their employment workforce is actually quite low compared to other places. When Palestine Action has targeted companies like the suppliers of Elbit Systems, because they also have numerous arms suppliers, then we have had, mostly suppliers, we have had workers come out and messages on Instagram, messages on social media, say, I completely support what you're doing. I think we had one person say, can you destroy the air conditioning units to make sure I can't go into work? So we've had, many different people coming forward when it comes to it. I think Elbit employees are completely undated in terms of they understand what Palestine Action is. We haven't got reaction. A lot of their workers also come from Israel, so they actually import a lot of expertise and their engineers from Israel themselves. And I think they would have to leave Elbit Systems in order to speak up on it. but we have had it in different companies. We had it in Arconic. An ex-employee came forward and told us everything that was happening inside that factory. And they wouldn't have known that unless we took that action. And I think, we've had, I've done it myself, numerous people before Palestine Action, leaflet workers, etc., with minimal effect. But when we take action, then we do start seeing a big effect. And even if it's companies around Elbit Systems, the local community, etc., you can't ignore it, right? You cannot ignore if people are on an arms factory building, it's in your local area, they are throwing red paint, drenching that building in red paint to symbolize the bloodshed and exposing that company. If you work there, or if you're in that area, then it's going to be what they're talking about, and that's what brings awareness.
So another question we have is, do you have allies or quote unquote allies doing similar things here in the US? Do you have partners here, people that you know? Because one of Omar, actually, who you were in touch with, he mentioned that I think he was in New York over the weekend, and I think there was some kind of paint on one of the museums. I forgot what he told me exactly, but do you guys coordinate with people elsewhere?
So that thing in New York wasn't organised or coordinated with us, but I think they had got anonymously sent to us and asked to publicise it. And we do have people all across the US who reached out, who want to do something similar in their area. It's quite hard for us to figure out because, as you know, the US is absolutely massive. So we're like, oh, we've got loads of people in the US, and then it's actually, where are they? Where is their close to Elbit factory, etc. But there has been a lot of communication between activists in Palestine Action and activists across the world, and we're in talks with people about setting up Palestine Action in different places, which is hopefully going to happen soon. So, watch this space and everything. But there definitely is allies all over the place, and it's one of the powers of social media is that there's people following from all around the world, people who are inspired by the actions and want to do similar stuff in their area. And it's been an incredible tool for us. We've had issues with social media, as everyone has, who does Palestine stuff on censorship. But it does bring the message internationally in a way that it means you don't even really need, national media or the standard establishment media to cover our actions, because we are all our own media platforms now.
So also, I was looking at the Palestine Action website. I saw a few resources that you guys have, like the stickers, the posters, and then also tips about, for example, with the fire extinguisher guide. Is there any other tips you would give to other people? I know obviously you're focused on the UK, you know how everything works there. Is there any other tips that you would give to people who want to emulate what you're doing in the UK? Yeah,
I would definitely encourage it. I'd say, reach out to us if it's through our social media at pal_action on Instagram and Twitter. Email us at info@palestineaction.org. Definitely keen to speak to people in different countries about how they can emulate these tactics and these ideas. First thing I'd say is you need to find your target. If that's Elbit, if that's a company which is part of Elbit in any way, brilliant. If you don't have an Elbit where you are, then look at the other arms companies, look at the industries that are operating there, that are complicit, what speaks to a local context, because it doesn't. I think this has stopped people in some countries, is thinking that they have to have an Elbit site to be able to take this. But it's about taking the idea, and there are so many complicit companies, and making it work in that local context. So finding the target and doing the research, And, you know, we cannot advise on legal situations in every country because we're focused on Britain, but these resources are available in those places by other groups who take actions which often lead to arrests in other countries as well. So read up on that, be informed of what, you know, on what that is and what your rights are in that country. But most importantly, you know, it could be one of you, it can be two of you, be three of you, just take action, right? And I think the more you take action, spend more time taking action than talking about taking action, because that can often be a massive hindrance, is when there's constant conversations. And we always center it around the Palestine Action, right? The clue is in the name. We spend more time taking action than talking about it. Obviously, you need to have those conversations, but it doesn't have to be perfect. And also, you know, make sure whatever you do, get photos or get a video. You know, it's really important. You're your own media platform. We are our own media platform. We cannot rely on the company to advertise our actions. We have to do that. And that speaks to people, that brings people into the movement, get the pictures and get the videos. And go for it, most importantly. You know, when we did our first action, it was just 3 or 4 of us ran into an office building. It was spray paint in our hands and some paint, and just took a chance on what we were doing. And we had a videographer with us, which obviously helped massively. And then that went around like wildfire. Then we did it again, and then people joined. But the thing that started it was just going out there and taking a chance on it and doing it. So I would say, you know, speak to us as well by emulating stuff, and we can have meetings. And I think we're planning a workshop quite soon on international groups and Palestine Action, so that people can come to that. That will be on our social media quite soon as well, so people can come along to that as well. But reach out, and most importantly, just do it.
Yeah, that makes a lot of sense. And you know, we would all like to thank you. Like you said, it's just go for it. Unfortunately, here I don't, to my knowledge at least, I don't think we have similar initiatives. But I think that's what it would take to get awareness and to actually, because you mentioned, I think you said you basically Palestine Action costed Elbit 15 million pounds. Is that what you said, right?
Yeah.
Yeah. So I mean that's a big deal, and you know, money talks. So when the bottom line is being affected, that's when they'll start to change their behavior, I guess you could say.
Yeah.
But yeah, so we really appreciate everything you all are doing there. I know it's you know, you're putting yourselves at risk physically, but also legally, and so it's very impressive what you all are doing there. And can we ask, how many supporters do you have? I mean, how many people show up to your to the factories or whatever else?
Yeah, I mean, it depends on the area. So one thing, we've got thousands, probably tens of thousands of supporters in different ways, so to speak. We never announce our actions beforehand. No actions are announced beforehand, and most of the time, only the people that actually need to know about an action taking place know it's going to happen. So it all happens on a need-to-know basis, and that's to make sure that the action happens, doesn't get compromised by police, and you know, for the safety of everyone taking that action as well. And so it changes. It gets on the roof, then we spread the word, then people come out. We've seen it. We've seen thousands of people come out in different places. We've seen hundreds in places. We're seeing in some of the factories, you know, every week 100 people going to that same factory in protest. So it really depends on where we take action, how long we're occupying a site for, and you know, and yeah, I guess the time in the day, because it's always random. But there is a lot of support, and it keeps growing. You know, at the start, we did launch in a pandemic, and we launched in a pandemic because there was no waiting around, for it to happen. Elbit Systems considered themselves essential work, so they were literally producing throughout the pandemic. Nothing stops them. So we had to adapt a lot. And it's the only thing we knew, right? We were launching in a pandemic, so a lot of our actions had less people in order to, stay safe from the pandemic and everything. And it meant that not as many people could come out and support activists on the ground, which has changed now in the past 3-4 months. And we've seen that once the restrictions lifted, everything that's happening now in terms of what's happening in Gaza and Palestine, it's changing, and people are coming out in their masses at certain points and in certain actions, which is incredible to see, because we just had no litmus test before because it was a pandemic. But now we're seeing it. We're seeing, we saw it in Leicester, we saw thousands of people not only come out and support, but actually, they risked getting arrested in order to support that action. They've obstructed the police from being able to arrest those activists. And when the police denied the activists on the roof water, people from the local community threw up bottles of water, knowing that they're going to get arrested. They didn't get charged because it's really not illegal to give people water. It's just what they try and do to get people off the roof. But we're seeing that the support isn't just superficial. You know what I mean? It's people are invested in the success of this movement because people want Elbit to be shut down. They don't want Israeli arms companies operating on their doorsteps. So we have amazing supporters, who are very dedicated to the movement and to the success of it.
Great. And yeah, I actually like the fact that you mentioned that you occupy the site, because it's basically giving them a dose of their own medicine. So
yeah, exactly.
Yeah. And
you have to raise the Palestine flag from the top of the building.
Yeah, and we see the stuff on social media from here. It's very impressive, and we really thank you for doing that. I hope that some kind of movement would emerge here that would do the same, and they could definitely look to you as an example. So we hope so. One last question that we have here is, wouldn't it reduce the severity of lawsuits if you disrupted the factories in masses rather than a few individuals?
Yeah, so I think that there is a number of different ways to shut down a factory, right? If you had 1,000 people, for example, go day after day, sit in the road, get arrested time and time again, or risk getting arrested in order to blockade that factory, then yes, that would be impactful, of course, definitely. But also the fact that we've shut down arms factories with just 2 people sometimes, right? And this is thinking back to when we launched in the pandemic, etc. And that those just 2 people managed to make such an impact. So it's spreading resources and being able to do more disruption with those people. And also doing, if you get on top of the factory, etc., and cause however much damage to that building, if you're in a group of people and you're all doing it together, it's a lot easier to have that communication between each other about what you're going to do, how you're going to do it, etc., than 1,000 people. But to be honest with you, I think the only thing stopping us, every single person, the only thing keeping Elbit Systems and these companies alive, in a lot of senses, is us, because we can stop them. If we come out in mass and stop them every single day. But it takes having thousands of people who are willing to sit there every single day in front of all these factories to be able to do that. And we will get there. But that means more and more people joining us and taking that risk and doing it because it's worth it in order to shut these factories down.
Okay, so we're running out of time, but I just wanted to if you could please just just as a closing statement, what would you recommend? Obviously, again, we commend you on everything you do there. You've all set up a great model over there to disrupt companies like Elbit over there. What would you recommend for people elsewhere, whether it's in the US or anywhere else?
Yeah, I would say look around you. So one thing that always shocked me growing up was just seeing how the complicity was so extended to businesses, etc., around where I lived and where I grew up, and realizing that I wasn't innocent in this at all whilst I lived in this country, and that you had to do something about it. I think it's do your research, find out what's around you, and take that step to take action. It's going to be different in each country. You're going to have to research what that situation will be in different countries. There are people all over in different movements, environmental movements, etc., who have taken similar types of action, where a lot of the stuff may lead to arrest. Our arrest is not our aim. Our aim is to shut down these factories. But a lot of the time, when you shut down the factory, you end up getting arrested at the end of the day. Research what you can and can't do. We have people who have Palestine Action cost hundreds of thousands of pounds in one action. Now, if you did that, that would be brilliant. But at the same time, you don't have to do that. You can just occupy and climb into a building, block the front gates, whatever it is. I know it's different in the US to how it is in the UK, but there is definitely things that people still can do, and people still do for other movements. It's about bringing that urgency to the issue of Palestine, to the issue of the arms trade and our government's complicity with what is happening across the world, and acknowledging that we have a lot of power. There's so much power and ability when you live in these countries that are facilitating Israel's apartheid regime to stop it, to stop that complicity. And it's us that are going to do that. It's us as normal people who care, who've got to create that change, remembering that it only takes a small group of people to change things. That's it. And that can start off a whole movement. So going out there, taking that chance, take action, get rid of these arms companies. Why are they operating? Like, if we've got arms companies operating down the road an hour away from us, etc., we all have an ability to stop them. So using that ability to do that, and take this everywhere and make it known that people are not going to tolerate. We're not going to tolerate the arms trade operating in our countries, building weapons, making profits off the backs of people who have been killed and massacred across the world. We're not going to tolerate it. And it means that we have to take a chance and a risk in ourselves in order to stop that. But we have to do it because, humanity is fucked otherwise.
Yeah, no, and you put it perfectly there. I mean, that's the bottom line. And I think the best thing is, I think people, and we're all guilty of this, at least some of us here, you don't realize how much power you have until you actually do something. And the direct action strategy that Palestine Action is taking, clearly, the UK is one of the, top countries in the world. And so it's clear that the strategy is working there. So if it works there, it could work anywhere. And I would agree. I think I really think the direct action strategy is very useful. And again, we thank you for doing that. I know it takes a lot of bravery, a lot of personal risk and physical risk, as I'm sure you know. So we thank you so much for doing that and for setting an example for everybody else throughout the world. And I really hope that people emulate your model. That would be amazing. And hopefully, and I hope that eventually Elbit in the UK gets shut down. Hopefully, you guys annoy them enough to where they just have to move.
Yeah. We hope so.
Yeah. But thank you so much, Huda. Thank you very much for your time. Thanks for giving us a perspective into what you all do. And what's the website again for everybody to hear?
So it's palestineaction.org.
Okay.
We'd also encourage donations. We do like that because we don't get grants or whatever else, etc. Please do follow us at pal_action. We're on Twitter and Instagram. And yeah, join our mailing list, watch out, take action, and reach out to us if you want to do something similar wherever you are, if you're not in Britain.
Okay, great.
And thank you so much for having me. Really enjoyed it.
Thank you. We really appreciate it. And if you could just stay on the line with me, that would be great. But thank you all. Thank you to our audience for tuning in. And again, thank you, Huda. We really appreciate it. And please follow Palestine Action and keep up to date with everything they do. They're doing excellent work. Again, thank you all, and have a great day.